Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CPE webinar, Process Mapping for Efficiency and Cross-Training. My name is Sam Lester of the Office of University Controller. I am happy to be here with subject matter expert Kathy Illian from the Anschutz campus. Kathy, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Sam.
Thank you for coming over. We certainly appreciate it. Before we get started, a couple of administrative things we should cover. There is a Q&A function within the Zoom application located towards the bottom of your window. We do encourage you to throw out any questions that you have throughout the course of the webinar, and we will try to address them within the webinar timeframe. Also, we'll be sharing an audio recording of this webinar posted with the PowerPoint slides. We will post the answers to the Q&A questions that we get to and the ones that we're unable to address within the time allotted, along with the PowerPoint and the audio on the website later. To keep you engaged, we will have 3 interactive poll questions throughout the course of the webinar, and we'll get to one of those in just a moment. But an important reminder to any CPAs in the audience: in order to request your CPE credit, you must answer all 3 poll questions and attend the webinar in its entirety. Let's go ahead and launch the first poll question to get a feel for how that works. And the first poll question is, how does your organization train new staff? Do you typically do it in person with written documentation, including how-to guides, videos, or other? And we also encourage you, for anyone that answers other, to throw however you do like to train your new staff into the Q&A so we can read it to the audience members. It's got some good participation so far. We'll make sure we get a high percentage of people answering the question, and then we can go ahead and share the answers there. What do you foresee to be the highest ranking answer here, Kathy?
I'm thinking either videos or written documentation.
Okay, sounds good. All right, looks like we do have a majority of the attendees have completed their answers. I'm going to end the poll here, share the results. Looks like we have an overwhelming majority for in-person training, keeping it old school.
Cool. I like it.
Was that a surprise to you?
Well, not really. I mean, I was thinking video and written documentation just because the university itself has kind of invested in some amazing video training that I think is very effective. Of course, we still have a lot of in-person training and written documentation. So, you know, all of them help.
Excellent. Let's get rid of these here. And we can go ahead and get on with the presentation. On to the show. Kathy, I pass it over to you.
Okay. So how did I get started with process mapping? Well, the quest for a system like this really started about 17 years ago on my very first day at CU. I worked in the Office of Grants and Contracts, and my boss handed me a binder. It was 3 inches thick, and he said, "This is the National Institutes of Health Grants Policy Statement. Read this. It'll help you figure out your job." So again, it was 3 inches thick, a wall of words, and that was my training. And I remember thinking, there's got to be a better way, because this isn't really teaching me policy, but that's not really my job. So fast forward about 8 years to 2011. By then, I had been in several different roles with CU, and one of them was as the financial services trainer. So I did have some experience in helping people to learn and, you know, I hope facilitating that process. I started my current position. I'm the Director of Finance Administration for the Department of Neurology, which is on the medical campus, the Anschutz Medical Campus. We've now got about over 200 employees. So my background was not in neurology. It was not as any kind of medical clinician. My background was primarily with CU as human resources, finance, and grants and contracts. And all of these are good qualities for an administrator, but that didn't mean that I knew everything that was, you know, that all the employees and faculty in the department did. So the very nature of working in an academic medical community means that employee turnover can be high. because employees gain experience in the department's clinics and labs and then move on to maybe medical school or graduate school. So turnover is not a bad thing. You expect it in this type of department, but like many departments, there's little training documentation. Institutional knowledge is slowly gained, highly valued as it's used in daily work, but then it's lost when employees retire, transfer to other departments, get promoted, leave the university's employment, and new employees struggle to figure out the best way to perform the job functions, reinventing the wheel each time. So it only took me about a week in this position to realize I'd never sleep through the night again. I was so worried because my boss had a standard that he told me in the interview. He said, you got to keep the trains running on time. You know, there's really no excuse for our not getting our business done. So I really took that to heart. I managed a whole bunch of employees and had absolutely no idea what they did all day long. They were very competent, but the fear of the subject matter experts retiring, transferring out, or even being on family leave stressed me to my core because my boss counts on me. And also having an IT background, I wondered if the processes they were doing every day were actually efficient. No excuses, I had to do something. So about that time, my cousin, who's a restaurant owner in a kind of a tourist area in the West, he's always looking for business efficiencies because he has, by the very nature of his kind of tourist-oriented business, he has a lot of turnover. You know, he has employees come to work in the restaurant in the summer, and then they go somewhere else. And then the next summer, he has to hire new people. So he gave me a book that really, really started the wheels turning, and I highly recommend it. It's called The Checklist Manifesto. It's by Atul Gawande. And Atul is a very famous doctor who wrote this book about how to get things right. It asks the question and then answers, why do we fail at what we set out to do? Either the knowledge doesn't yet exist for the process, or it does, but we make mistakes. And this is so true at CU and other big organizations. Every day, there's more and more to manage and to get right and to learn. And the capability of employees is not the biggest problem. The biggest problem is the fallibility of human memory and attention. So we need a system that uses that knowledge and those capable people, but which makes up for human inadequacy. And that tool is called a checklist. So I was pretty excited to read this book. And, you know, this book is actually written by, I believe he's a surgeon. It was about surgery checklists. And at the end of the book, you realize these checklists saved lives. I'm only talking about solving business problems. So I thought it was really, really important. So I was ecstatic about going back and creating checklists for department functions. So what I learned very quickly is that in order to improve a process, you have to first understand it. You have to make sure that the functions are handled in the most efficient manner possible. And you can't do that without knowing what the process is and really analyzing it. So remember, I'm coming into the department with a financial, HR, and IT background, and I needed very quickly to come up with a system that documented the processes I knew nothing about. So process maps are essentially swim lane diagrams that describe in a visual fashion the tasks, decisions, and timelines of specific departmental functions by each participant in the function. It uses flowcharting tools and jargon to define important tasks and functions. So back up a little bit and let me tell you a little bit about my background. I told you that I have an HR, finance, and a little bit of an IT background. I actually have an undergraduate degree in information systems and a graduate degree in instructional technologies for adult learners. So I learned through all that education that most, and my experience as a financial services trainer, that most training materials are a wall of words, often inside a Word document or a PowerPoint slideshow. Bullets and indents might attempt to parse information into meaningful sections, but at the end of the day, the training material is just a bunch of words. There's overwhelming evidence supported by the last 15 to 20 years of global research into technology and adult learning that people learn better from pictures and words than from just words alone. By using only words, the opportunity to transfer knowledge more quickly and with better retention is lost. So look at this slide, and you can see very quickly the very first place your eye goes to is the stop sign. And that has meaning, you know, across the world. Apparently in art school, they teach you that the first thing that people see is shape. The second thing they see is color. And then and only then do they see text. So you can see, compared to the 10 seconds it will take you to read the words that tell you don't go into that room versus just the image of the stop sign, the understanding is more immediate and clear with the visual. So I'm a big fan of visuals, and that has a lot to do with the success of process mapping. So a process map will give you all the details in order of a function. It gives you the timeline, responsible units, the tasks, decision points, links to logins, links to forms, tips, all that kind of stuff on what's called a swim lane diagram. Now, a swim lane diagram differs a little bit from a flow chart, even though it's a type of flow chart, in that it has a timeline and it really clearly delineates the different entities involved in that function. Sometimes flowcharts can be a little confusing if they don't have that information. And of course, in organizations like ours, it's very important. We make them vertical because the tasks are usually more plentiful than the number of entities involved. Not always. And of course, you can always format your document as the process dictates. But our templates are primarily vertical, with the timeline going down the left-hand side, the entities going across the horizontally across the top, the decision points indicated by a diamond, which is traditional flowchart icon. Task documents, we use regular flowchart documentation. So this particular slide is a map for having an event with food and alcohol. A little background, we are a state institution, and therefore there's very high scrutiny when we spend money on food and alcohol, you know, understandably so. However, often we have events for donors who want to come in and learn about our research and learn about what our clinicians are doing, and they want to donate to the cause. And those types of events, we're allowed to have food and alcohol, but there are very, very specific processes we have to follow when that happens. So this is an example of that. The other thing that I wanted to point out, in the purple, or the last couple columns there, the different colors, those are organizations or departments or someone external to our department. And that's really key, because we have no idea what their personnel situation is. We have no idea if they have someone on family leave or if they've had some turnover, that kind of stuff. We don't know what their timeline is for certain things. And this becomes critical because it doesn't really matter what their timeline is. We still have a deadline that we have to meet. And so what we've learned is that it's super helpful when across an organization, you have to perform a task that includes other people. If you don't understand what their timeline is, it's just super easy to pick up the phone and say, hey, can I send you a copy of this process map? Because we're trying to figure out, you know, the best way to meet our timeline, the most efficient way to perform this process. And we need to understand a little bit more about what you guys do. And that's been super helpful for us to get that kind of clarity.
You can certainly see how the simplified information inside of the shapes and colors is way more digestible than just a block of text.
Exactly. And let me also point out that you notice on the diamond, which indicates a decision, that there's a bold blue line and then a couple icons down at the bottom. The last one has a bold blue line. That is how we indicate a hyperlink. So anything that we're going to hyperlink to, for instance, maybe it's just a login to a website. Maybe it's an additional page of documentation that just gives much needed information. Maybe it's a link to a policy. Maybe it's a screenshot, or maybe it's even a video of, oh, here's a 3-minute video on, you know, how to run this report in this system. So anytime that we feel like the user might want additional information, we outline it in a 3-point, blue line, and we add a hyperlink to that. And I can talk a little bit more about the technicalities later.
That does bring us to our second poll question. And just a quick reminder to the CPAs out there, you will need to participate in all 3 of these. Let me go ahead and get this launched. So what do we think are the traits of a well-trained employee? They do the job right, they understand the big overall picture, their questions are relevant, or they simply show confidence in their job and their work. Wonder what we're going to think on this one. Looks like answers are rolling in. While we're doing this, we have audience member Peter Dodge. What program/software do you like to use for your process maps, Kathy?
And I'm going to talk about that at length a little bit more, but right now we've been using Microsoft Visio, and there are a lot of reasons we do that. Again, I'll talk about that a little bit more in the future, but there's also freeware out there. One of the most popular ones is called Draw.io, DRAW.io, I believe. It's freeware, does a great job. And then I believe Google may have a flow charting software that I believe is also free. So, I always say to people, I don't care what you use, even if you draw it on a scratch sheet of paper, do a process map.
As long as the result is there, right?
That's a great question. I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute.
So let me end the poll here. We got good participation and I can share the results. Also, a quick shout out from the first poll question to Leela and Samantha. Leela uses all of the above for her training from the previous question. And then we have some step-by-steps through process notebooks that Samantha likes to use.
Great.
So let's see, not overwhelming for the majority, but we do have a majority under defining a well-trained employee as someone who understands the big picture. That sound accurate to you?
I think that's great. I was going to say, but before I saw the potential answers, that you have to be a lifelong learner because in our world, everything changes, but it really dovetails nicely into you have to see the big picture. And that's what process mapping does, because when you understand the big picture, instead of, a lot of training just is very tactical, very operational, here's how you run this report, but you don't get the big picture of the, the mission of the organization and how important it is that things are done on time. So I think that, understanding the big picture is huge.
Sounds good. We do have one other audience member question. She said she likes the way that you can send the flowchart to someone to say that we're trying to understand this process. Can you clarify? It can be very difficult to bring up problems in business processes with others, and they can always feel challenged with that.
And I've had that experience, to be honest with you, in the beginning. So we work with some external organizations that we literally, they're not even CU. But we work with them on a daily basis, and we have no control over the way their policies are written or the way their processes work or that kind of thing. But we've learned a lot from that. And all I have to say is that if you appeal to people, not in a punitive way, but in a way that says, I'm just seeking to understand so that I won't be bothering you all the time. Like, where is this? Where is that? If you appeal to them in a very, gosh, you can really help me out kind of situation, I have found 99.9% of the time, they're more than willing to take the time to say, oh no, you got that wrong. here's why we do it this way, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't really take a long time for them to explain that to you, but that explanation, means a lot in your understanding of, what you may not know everything that happens during their part of the task, but you have an understanding of their timeline and everything like that. So I really haven't found, as long as you're very respectful of their time, and not punitive, like, oh yeah, your policy is really written poorly. Don't say things like that. Just tell them that you're trying to figure it out so that we can all do everything on time. And I've really found that to be helpful.
Yeah, and it mirrors itself in the help desk world when people call, but they want to learn how to do processes on their own. It saves them time, so they're not waiting in the queue for the phone. If they can just do something in 30 seconds on their own end.
Exactly. It's much more efficient. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, let's move on. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So what are the goals of process mapping? The goals of process mapping are primarily to shorten the learning curve, or at least the initial goal. Let's put it that way. Shorten the learning curve for and instill confidence in employees who have taken on new positions, to capture the institutional knowledge of longer-term employees, and most importantly, to provide checklists for critical functions to ensure deadlines are met. We all know what it's like to start on your first day of work. You don't know anybody. You don't know what you're doing. I have been thanked so many times by new employees who learned really quickly and gained confidence over a short period of time using our process maps. So again, capturing institutional knowledge, it's so huge in an organization like ours, and I would say in most organizations. Remember that I came into this department as a director, not knowing a thing about, what clinicians did or what the clinical research processes were. So I needed a way to capture that expertise so that when and if they retired, went on vacation, went on family leave, whatever, their job still got done. I mean, it's cut and dried. So, of course, the purpose of process mapping is to provide checklists for critical functions to ensure that deadlines are met. So that let me give you an example. When you hire, let's say a medical doctor in my department, a neurologist, it sounds like it's something that can happen very quickly. It literally takes a minimum of 4 months from the time that person decides to come to work for us before that medical doctor is even qualified to practice medicine in our environment. And I have to laugh. My predecessor, who I was lucky enough to have spend probably the equivalent of about a month with me over a year or so after I started this job, told me that if you make an offer to a medical doctor, and by the time they start, which is usually 5 or 6 months later, if that person isn't fully credentialed, meaning they don't have a medical license or any one of a myriad of qualifications they need to practice medicine, I'd probably be fired. So I decided right then and there that was going to be the very first process map I ever made because I didn't want to get fired. So what I did was, I started doing this process map with the help of all the expertise in the department. And I literally started printing them out. When I hired a doctor, process map wasn't just something that was on my intranet that I could look at and say, okay, I'll do this, that, and that in this order. I would print it out and say, I'm hiring Dr. Wilson. The start date is February 1st, 2017. The first thing I need to do is this. Oh, I got this back from Dr. Wilson on, February 28th. I would literally use it as a checklist. So it was the best, kind of the best of both worlds. So what can process mapping do for you? So again, I told you I have a little bit of an IT background, and I think one of the most important skills that it teaches employees is what's called system thinking, and we talked about it earlier, the seeing the big picture piece. I mean, think about how many employees come into your organization and they're not involved maybe in higher level meetings. They're really operationally, they get the training on how to run reports, or, how to fill out a form and where to file those forms and that kind of stuff. But they don't really, they just haven't been trained to see the big picture. So it teaches employees a lot of things they may not have learned in their education or their former employment. It's hard to get the big picture with most operational type training. So I think that's a super, super important skill that it does for individuals. Forget about, the organization as a whole. For each individual that gets involved in process mapping, it really teaches them to see the big picture. So the other thing that it does for us is that we have had so much fun with process mapping. We literally, now we get together 3 times a month. And the reason we get together so often is that we have such a big department now, and we have so many process maps. We have over 200 process maps on our intranet. And so there are 3 primary areas in our department. One is administration, one is research, and then one is what we call faculty support. And those are the personnel who help faculty with really everything, scheduling, some patient calls, travel, expense reimbursement. They just kind of help them run their lives. So we have so many process maps to get through, and to keep current, which is something else I'll talk about, that we have 3 process map meetings a month. And we have fun. We joke with each other, which is really kind of fun for new employees to kind of be just indoctrinated into the culture. We have a good time, and we laugh a lot, and, but we get the work done too. We get the process maps done. So the other real learning experience for employees, what we've learned is that it gives employees the opportunity to practice critical thinking and problem solving. And what a valuable skill that is. If you're not trained in problem solving, particularly in business problem solving, it's a new skill, but wow, it's much needed. And regardless of whether you're in the department for the short term or the long term, it's going to be a skill that's going to follow you throughout your employment. So I like it when I see an employee who's maybe new to process mapping indicate in a meeting that I can tell they're thinking 2 and 3 and 4 steps beyond what we've already discussed. And I love it when I see that. I just love it. It's like a light going off.
And I do enjoy this slide. It looks like this is a fairly well-trained employee, and maybe that last green piece is just the big picture.
Made the difference, right? Exactly. So then the other thing that process mapping does, which is near and dear to my heart, is it teaches information design. And we all know there's good information design and there's not so good. We try and keep our process maps very clear. I'm going to go over some other examples. A lot of white space, so it's not overwhelming, using icons that we all understand. Again, using the consistency of the flowchart is that the word? Iconography? Icons.
Sounds great to me.
Okay. The bolded shapes for links and that kind of stuff. So we really try and use standardized, clear, lots of white space, and keep it understandable. So I think that's also something that is important. And I think my employees like learning that stuff. And then the other thing that it does is it creates cross-training opportunities. This has been huge for me. Again, turnover is not always unexpected, and it's not always bad. We have a lot of folks most people that come in and they move on, they're moving on to something bigger and better. And we do not, we don't have a problem with that at all. But when that happens, again, we have to get our work done. We have to get it done on time. So we like to say that process mapping creates the cross-training opportunities. And let me tell you what, the employees love it, especially the ones that maybe have a career path either within the university or in some kind of organization where this will help them. anything they can learn. Let's say they're in the research world, but they start attending some of the administrative process maps meeting, and they learn a little bit about the HR functions. And they might come to me, usually people come to me and say, I find that very interesting. I'd really like to learn more. And I'll just say, well, come on, anyone's invited to any of our process meetings, even process map meetings, even faculty. And I've had faculty come before because they really, a lot of them see the value in it. So the cross training is super important. And I have to say that most of my employees are staff are cross-trained. I mean, if I have someone in finance that's out, I promise you I've got someone else that can pick up some process maps and get that work done. The same with research. So I think the cross-training opportunities is good for the department, but it's also very good for the employees because it makes them a much more well-rounded employee.
And then the more the merrier, anybody that voluntarily shows up for training, right?
That's right. That's the way I look at it. So probably the most important part of process mapping as far as the department goes is that it reveals flaws in existing processes. And you may recall at the beginning that I did say that the very first thing you have to understand about a process is, does it work? Is it efficient? I mean, is it the best way to do things? It's one thing to document a process, but we really want to make sure that we're documenting the best process, the optimal process, the one that's going to make it work for the organization in the best way. So to that end, the maps are, again, we meet 3 times a month, and anyone in that particular administrative area of the department comes, and anyone else is welcome. They're reviewed, edited, and approved for publishing by the entire staff. This mass review is critical because it ensures there are no assumptions of prior knowledge. The map should be clear enough that an employee on the first day of work can follow that. So what's interesting about this point is that, of course, you have to have the subject matter experts. They're usually leading, the meeting, or they're, kind of filling in most of the gaps. But most importantly, you have to have the objective people, the people that don't know anything about the process, because they're the ones that are going to go, oh, wait a minute, that doesn't really make sense, or did you miss a step, or something like that. The subject matter experts, and I've seen it time and time again, they've done this. And maybe it is an optimal process. Maybe they're doing it exactly the right way, and we are just trying to get it, down on a sheet of paper. But these people think it's easy because in their minds, they don't, they're not stopping at each step going, okay, is there a decision I have to make? They just go through the process so fast in their heads that they think it's easy. And this has happened time and time again. Whenever usually a faculty member has a problem with the process, an administrative person is trying to help them, with that process. And I said, well, can you just draft me a little process map of what it looks like now? And they will come to me and they'll give me a process map that's maybe a half a page or 3/4 of a page long with, maybe 3 tasks, maybe a decision, and that's it. And as I sit with them and really pick apart, the process itself, we end up with a 3 or 4 page process map. And it's not that they're not trying to be helpful, it's that they're experts at it. So they're flitting through their mind in a very quick manner what that process is. By having these objective folks in the meeting who can say, they may not know the process, but they know logic. And they may go, well, wait a minute, shouldn't you have done this before this? Or if you're saving it on that drive, should you name it in a certain way? Or that kind of stuff. So those objective folks who are not subject matter experts are really powerful in revealing the flaws in existing processes. So how can you create process maps? Well, I'll tell you how we do it. I've already told you that we meet 3 times a month, usually for an hour-long meeting. We also have student workers who we've had for years and years. These are wonderful, bright people that come in to work for us while they're in school, and they have, to a number, loved becoming involved in the process mapping program. They become we call them process map gurus. And a lot of them, I happen to know for a fact, have actually used that term on their resumes because it's a really good task. But anyway, so we meet, the group of subject matter experts and the objective people and whoever's doing the technical components of the maps, the process map gurus. We get in a room, and usually we have a projector. Although sometimes if we don't have a projector and we have a whiteboard, we'll just draw on the whiteboard. Sometimes we don't even have a whiteboard, if we can't get a particular conference room for that particular meeting, and we'll all just, draw our own maps as we go along with it on our templates. So that's how we get started. Everyone is welcome. Again, I've told you that, we invite faculty, we invite folks from other departments, and we've had a lot of people come visiting, just learning to, try and do it for their own departments. But at the end of the day, whoever's hosting the meeting usually has a draft. Usually prior to the meeting, that host has started a map, or maybe that whole section has started a map and they're not finished, or maybe we're just starting one from scratch. So the very first thing they do is, this is our template. You can tell that it's got the entities across the horizontal top. It's got a title. It's got a timeline going down the vertical left side. It's got the icon for the start, or the catalyst is usually an oval. Tasks are usually rectangles. Decisions are diamonds. When needed, we use arrows. If there's a yes or no, then that clarifies things. We don't always have to use a lot of arrows, because we have the understanding that the timeline, again, goes down vertically, and we can see the tasks one above the other. We literally, you can see here, there's not one icon that is on the same level as the other. So we automatically know that the catalyst that right here says start, that the next task happens after that, then the decision happens after that, then the yes or no happens after that, and so forth and so on.
Kathy, Anthony would like to know if this template could be something that could be provided when we post all the other materials.
Absolutely. We have it in PDF form and in several different formats. Happy to provide that.
Great.
So then you can see the timeline. And this is funny. I tend to be very, what's a nice word, single-minded when it comes to the timeline of a process map. Because remember, sometimes a checklist, which got this whole thing started, sometimes a checklist doesn't really tell you what the deadline is. It tells you what has to happen in what order. But remember my story about hiring a medical doctor, and that if I don't get that person fully credentialed by the time they start, I'll probably get fired. So deadlines are really, really important. Now, a lot of times, newer folks to process mapping will start the optimal timeline with day one. Day one doesn't help me at all, because what is the catalyst? The very first item on your timeline should be, what's the catalyst? Maybe the catalyst is a date. Maybe it's July 1st of every year this process starts. Or maybe it's when a provider asks you to arrange international travel. Or maybe it's the second week of February in each year. I mean, there's something that kicks that process off, and I want to know what it is. So don't just say day one, say what the catalyst is. And then the deadline, you've got to have the deadline. And a lot of times we get so mired in building the tasks, the links, the decisions, the documents where they're saved, the logins, things like that. We forget about the timeline. It's actually one of the most critical parts. So again, not to belabor the fact, but attendees, the most powerful part of the process map meeting is that attendees seek and provide clarification. And again, it's the people that don't know the process very well that really provide a lot of clarification. They really draw it out of the subject matter expert's mind, and they put it down on paper so that, again, the goal is an employee on the first day of work would know how to do that by reading the process map.
I would think that'd be extremely valuable to get the input of anybody that's not already a subject matter expert to make sure that it works correctly.
Right, and the logic works, exactly. So after that, either the host, after the meeting, or the delegate, the process map guru, adds the supplemental documentation, screenshots, link to logins, that kind of stuff. That basically, we do everything in Microsoft Visio right now, like I mentioned. Again, there are other software platforms out there that you could use. We also provide, is it Acrobat Pro? They keep changing the name. Adobe Acrobat Pro, so that we have the tools to take this Visio file, publish it to a PDF, and then add the things that PDFs are great for letting you do all the tools. You can add comments, you can add hyperlinks, you can do pretty much whatever you want in Acrobat Pro. So we do also provide that to really anyone in the department that wants it.
Do you have a quick question from Deborah in the audience? How would you insert a link within the process map, and what links have you used, such as links to documents or other?
So how you do it is you basically right-click in Visio, you right-click the icon, the task or whatever, and I believe there's a little dialogue that comes up that says add hyperlink or edit hyperlink, and that's where you put in the URL. Now, I believe it's been a while since I've done this, but when you publish it from Visio to Acrobat, sometimes that hyperlink doesn't carry forward. At least this was the case a couple of years ago when I was involved more in the technical parts. But that's okay, because inside of Acrobat or the PDF document, you can also add the hyperlink. And so the hyperlink is just the web address of wherever you're trying to go to. And so that's a great question, because what we also do, let's say we are linking to supplemental information. Let's say it's a Word document that we've created, that we have added some screenshots into. Maybe it's got some, hey, here's a tip on, how to do this, or make sure you do this by, the 26th of the month, or any kind of supplemental information. We tend to convert anything, like if it's a Microsoft Word document or even an image or something like that we're linking to, we tend to convert them all to PDF, because, as long as you have a PDF reader on your computer, which most people do, they don't even have to have Microsoft Office. We don't want the user to have to, click on a link that's a Word document, and then Word has to start up, and, it just takes time. So it's much more efficient for us to convert everything to PDF, and that's how we do it, basically.
That does bring us to our third poll question. And just an additional reminder to the CPAs out there, please make sure you participate in this third question as well. Which of the following are essential parts of a process map? Decisions and tasks, the units responsible, the timeline, or the always important snacks? Wonder what we're going to get here in terms of results.
That was a Normandy question.
It may have been. It may have been. Looks like we got a lot of participation. Answers are rolling in. I was thinking earlier that, the involvement of all the stakeholders in terms of like approving a process map that you're creating, feel like, wouldn't it be a challenge the more people that you have, if they all have to approve it? Do you ever get like into a bottleneck for approval, you know?
We do, but it's not really the approval, because by the time we've worked through each task, decision, yes, no, link, blah, 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 we're already on the same page.
You're already there.
Yep.
That's a great way to do it.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a majority of audience members having participated in this. Let me go ahead and end the poll and share the results.
And it is a little bit of a joke question, because it's really all of the above. Sometimes we forget the snacks.
Yep.
Because you got to have that timeline. You have to have the tasks and decisions, the responsible units, and snacks help.
Yeah, well, I was kind of expecting a higher turnout for the snacks vote, but it looks like we've got 53% for tasks and decisions, which of course
Are
probably makes
probably the most important.
more logical sense.
Right, exactly. Okay, so just some best practices. And again, this is a little bit of an iteration. Even a hand-drawn map is better than none, I promise you. But, you know, with all the freeware that's out there, again, draw.io, Visio, I think now is fairly affordable. You know, I think most of the Microsoft products, a lot of software have gone to a monthly fee. I don't know if I mentioned, but in the beginning, anyone who wanted Microsoft Visio in my department, I went ahead and ordered for them, even though it was it was an expense, because I felt like they would really, if they were that interested in learning it, they would really contribute to the process mapping program. The other thing that I was fortunate enough to do, because my boss gave me the resources to do, is that before the university provided lynda.com, now LinkedIn training, I paid, I bought about 10 to 15 licenses for lynda.com, which is now LinkedIn training, which has tens of thousands of amazing training videos on software and creativity. I've actually been a paying member for about 15 years until, fortunately, the university started supplying it for everyone. But even before that happened, I gave staff not only access to lynda.com, those people who wanted it, I gave them protected time in their daily workday. If they had time to do some training, they could just put up a sign that say, hey, I'm training, you know, knock if you need me, that kind of stuff. And I think they really appreciated that, and it really contributed to our program.
Michaela in the audience wanted to know if there's any specific software that you use to track the processing, like if you're sharing with someone else.
So that's a great question. I had this amazing employee who joined us, I believe, as a student worker, and she really latched on to the process mapping program. Her name is Crystal, and she started saying, you know, we have, well, first of all, they're all on our intranet, and they're categorized, and we have a search tool, you know, where you can find them pretty easily, even though there's so many. But what she added to the process is we now keep a primary stakeholder is listed in very small font on the process map, so it's not super noisy, and a last date updated is also. And then at the bottom, she suggested we put a legend for the new people who maybe don't always have an introductory class into process mapping. So that was super helpful. The other thing I'm just about to talk about is the naming convention. So go ahead to the next slide. I think we've seen this before. You know, just the key timelines, the entities, the decisions, the links, that, you know, make sure that it goes vertically down the page, whatever. And then the other point I want to point out before I talk about the naming convention is that we color code the participant tasks for clarity. So let's say, you know, I'm Kathy Ilian, I'm the Director of Finance Administration, and then I have my two second in commands are AJ and Joseph, and those are Business Services Program Directors. You'll never see my name on a process map. You'll never see AJ and Joseph's name on a process map, because we don't want to have to redo 200 process maps when someone leaves. So we put the role name. So on this one, you can see that I'm the DFA, the Director of Finance Administration. My color is teal. The current incumbent is me. We also use this one for my chair, and his name is Ken Tyler. So we keep this legend that has different colors. And of course, if I could show you the printout of this legend, now that our department is, is so big with staff, it is probably 3 mat size paper wide of all this. So we've had to get very creative with the colors, but color coding is important. Because you can see at a glance, oh my gosh, this is heavy duty me in this process, or hey, I don't have anything to do with this. I don't have to worry about it too much. So to your question, was that Michaela? The question about keeping it organized, the biggest thing that we do is we use standard naming conventions for files and linked documents. For example, let's say that it's a human resources series of process maps. Now, if you had 10 or 15, that's fine. And maybe using a naming convention is not that important. But when you start having 50 and 60 and 70 and 100 process maps in that area, you have to use a naming convention. So what we use is, let's say it's human resource. We started out the name for the process map and any related documents would start out HR dash. And then I like to use a verb ending in ing. Again, I'm very single-minded about this. So standardization is always good. It's communication. So HR dash credentialing a new provider. And then if there are links to additional documents, those documents would be called HR dash credentialing a new provider #1.pdf. HR dash credential, or even more explanatory, HR dash credentialing a new provider dash CU medicine credentialing.pdf. So that when you're searching these hundreds and hundreds of documents that make up your process maps, your search engine actually works. And if I would enter in a search box credentialing, everything that relates to that particular process map is going to show up. So it becomes important when you actually have, more than just a few. And trust me, you will.
So at this point, we can open it up for questions. The first of which was submitted by Peter Dodge a couple moments ago. Are there any Linda or LinkedIn courses that are go-tos for you, recommended for process mapping?
So that's interesting. I keep thinking there's going to be, maybe I should do one. There's not really for process mapping. There is for Microsoft Visio. They're doing a lot more business analysis type courses, but I haven't seen specific to process mapping. Where was it that I saw? No, there are other not really academic, but online learning platforms like Udemy, udemy.com, Skillshare. I mean, they're kind of popping up everywhere. And on 1 or 2 of those, I did see some process mapping, but really take some business analysis courses and take some, there are customer mind mapping. What we're really doing is mapping things. So if you can find training that's on mapping anything, I think it would be helpful. But I actually think the training on Visio is pretty informative for this process.
So a quick comment from Fred Manley a little earlier. First, kudos on a great presentation, and we do all agree on that. But now Fred does have a question. How would you balance providing detail in the process maps with keeping them simple enough to actually show the process and be effective?
And hi, Fred. Thanks for the kudos and the question. Basically, that is why we link to things instead of including them on there. And if I see a process map that has a task that is, let's say, on a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper, and if it's 3 inches long with a whole lot of tiny text, I'm going to say, yeah, maybe not. And I'm going to suggest that we put the main function, the main task, the verbiage for that in that icon, and then we link to additional information. So the linking is crucial to keep it clean, to keep it, clarified, but also to give the user every bit of information they need.
Excellent question, Fred. At this point, we'll kick to the next slide. Just contact info for Kathy, and I'd like to extend a great big thank you on all of our behalfs for the presentation. It was very, very informative.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you.
Yeah, and anyone has any questions, there's my email and phone number. Happy to talk about process mapping anytime.
And remember, to the CPAs in the audience, these are instructions for requesting credit, and the course slides and handout, as well as the evaluation. And actually, in this webinar, it appears that we've answered just about every question during the course of it. But we will be posting the answers to the questions as well, with the audio and the PowerPoint.
And the samples of the templates.
And the samples of the templates.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Kathy.
Yep, sure.
I'd like to say thank you to all the attendees, those that participated with questions and those that didn't. We certainly appreciate you. And a big thank you again to Kathy for coming in and presenting today. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Mm-hmm.
Hope everybody has a great day, and we'll see you on the next CPE webinar. Bye-bye.